World War I was a global-scale war with 8,528,000 soldiers dead and millions of others missing. The results of the war had countries dissolve, get a new identity, and change. During this war, Russia went from being under the Tsar's rule to the Bolsheviks' rule, a socialist party ran by Vladimir Lenin. The cause was that the people hated the Tsar, his policies, and his unwillingness to modernize and relinquish any power. Yet even though the ruler changed, people still suffered. Before World War I even started, life was harsh in Russia. Factory workers had to deal with overcrowding and impoverishment because the cities they lived in had their populations double, which the infrastructure wasn't meant to handle. Food shortages were frequent, and between 1891 to 1892, 400,000 Russians died of famine. The cause were wars taking toll on the economy, Russia's harsh climate, the population boom at the end of the 19th century. Educated Russians saw the rule of the Tsar was hindering social progress and scientific advancements that the rest of the Europe already had. The Tsar, Nicholas II, weakened Russia more by starting a war with Japan and losing in the Russo-Japanese War. On 8 March, in the Gregorian calendar, on International Women's Day, a large-scale protest by workers was led by Father Gapun. Father Gapun was hoping to directly present the workers' request to the Tsar, even though it was a peaceful protest and didn't aim to overthrow the Tsar. The police were ordered to fire. Hundreds of unarmed men were killed and injured. This was the Bloody Sunday Massacre, and it led to the 1905 revolution. During the 1905 revolutions, workers organized a series of strikes that crippled the country. Later on, farmers and soldiers joined, causing the creation of Soviets. The revolution ended up failing due to a lack of leadership, organization, but the people still wanted change from hunger, poor conditions, and the Tsar's failure to protect and improve Russia. The Tsar was getting all the blame because he had all the power. He was the head of the country. A domino had begun that would lead to the Russian Revolution by the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin. They were inspired by Karl Marx's idea that capitalism is flawed and will lead to inequality among men. He promoted communism, in which the wealth was shared. The Bolsheviks planned to overthrow the Tsar and capitalism and establish a dictatorship of the proletarian to guide society until it was no longer needed, though for now it didn't seem like there would be another revolution until a certain man named Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. The assassination started World War I in 1914, and if you thought everything I said before was bad, then you haven't seen the half of it. Nicholas II, the Tsar, made Russia join the war to support the Serbs and its allies. Russia, as mentioned before, was not able to modernize as fast because the Tsar was determined to hang on to power. This ended up leading to factories not producing enough firearms and ammunition needed for the army. In fact, at the start of the war, they had 800,000 people who didn't have rifles to train with, and the rest had to use decades-old firearms. Soldiers in the front lines sometimes went in unarmed until they could grab a rifle from a dead soldier. Bullets were also limited, and every shot had to count. That was just not the only problem the Tsar caused. The country had a poor infrastructure, not ready to effectively supply supplies to the army and food for the people. It was further worsened when the food prices increased due to a lack of supply versus demand, causing inflation. Workers began striking and demanding increased pay, because how else were they supposed to get food? To make things worse, the Tsar, Nicholas II, decided to lead the military. For context, he was no general or a strategist. Instead of that, he should have left the tactics to a general who understood war and went back to the capital to try to mend whatever he could of his collapsing nation. The Tsar and his military failed due to a lack of supplies and competent leadership. In the first few weeks, 30,000 soldiers died and 100,000 were captured by the Germans in the Battle of Tannenberg. In the fall of 1915, around 800,000 Russian soldiers had died, and Russia wasn't gaining any territory. Russia was losing badly in the war. The Tsar was the only one to blame, because he had all the power to do what was needed during and long before World War I. But he was blinded by power to the point he believed God chose him to lead Russia. The people have lost all their faiths and have despised the Tsar. People wonder if the decisions the Tsar was making were from stupidity or treason. And the Tsar, from the letters he wrote, seemed not to understand his empire was crumbling down until it was too late. The people were no longer fearing the Tsar, because their hate was overpowering. A revolution began on 22nd February 1917, or 8 March 1917 in the Gregorian calendar, by metal workers in the capital, Petrograd. A day later, on International Women's Day, women joined in, protesting against the food rationing. Then this protest grew to 200,000 people. They all demanded for the Tsar to no longer rule and for the end of the war. Nearly all industries were closed, and the Tsar ordered a general to end the protest. But the soldiers also hated the Tsar, so they mutinied and joined the protest. The Tsar was now forced to abdicate and was replaced with a provisional government. The provisional government was supposed to be temporary until an election could be held. They also didn't have full power and had to share powers with the Soviets. The provisional government was liked by many, but also disliked, and some thought it was as or worse than the Tsar, because it was failing to meet the people's demands for the war to end and a solution to the food shortage, causing an increase in food prices. The government thought that if they could win the war, then it would unite the country and they wouldn't lose any of their resources and land to the Central Powers when they signed the treaty. Unfortunately, they weren't winning the war. Germany found an opportunity to get Russia out of the war and focus their attention on France and Britain. They wanted Vladimir Lenin to go back to Russia and destabilize the provisional government. Vladimir Lenin arrived with his slogan, "Peace, Land, Bread." These were things the provisional government was failing. Then another revolution, known as the Bolshevik Revolution, but it is sometimes called the October Revolution, happened. In this, Lenin, with the Bolsheviks and its allies, did a nearly bloodless coup against the provisional government. Bolsheviks promised a nation for the common folk. Soon a new government was made with Lenin as the dictator. Yet the people still suffered. Maybe Lenin did have the best intentions for turning Russia into a dictatorship, but he failed to realize from the Tsar that absolute power always results in absolute corruption. In the end, he ended up making Russia as or worse when the Tsar was in command. There are unofficial rules that dictators, absolute monarchs, and any rulers with absolute power needs to follow, and this is the reason they always neglect the people. The rule for absolute rulers is to make sure they spend most of their treasury on the military and the police, A ruler cannot maintain a nation alone and needs people to maintain the nation. Those people help rulers keep people and the country in check. The people, as long as they fear the ruler and don't hate the ruler, will reluctantly follow along if you control the military and the police. The ruler will also have to make sure they are spending most of their treasury on the military and the police to make sure the military generals don't conspire with anyone trying to overthrow the ruler and replace the ruler with an opposition who claims he will pay more. This then leads to the ruler making cuts to the budget meant for the people to pay more on the military and the police. It's worth noting you still want to spend the budget on the people for resources and not make them hate the ruler, but instead fear the ruler. The reason is that people who fear are easier to control than people who despise the ruler, because those people are fueled with hate and it will take them to many lengths. This and the fact the Tsar wasn't willing to modernize and improve the economy is why the Tsar failed and so many people want a revolution. That's why people with absolute power are always neglecting and will get corrupted, because the ruler either gets taken over by another person or cuts the budget on the people and focuses on the military and the police.